lawmakers in San Francisco recently approved something called Laura's Law, which allows the forced treatment of the mentally ill under certain circumstances. Now, the law was named after 19-year-old Laura Wilcox, who was shot and killed by a mentally ill patient in Nevada County Behavioral Health Clinic, where she was working as an intern. Now, Raw Story explains that if this law gets final approval and gets signed by the governor, it would allow court-ordered outpatient treatment for people with chronic and severe mental illness. Now, that's mental illness that's deemed a risk to themselves or others. One of the other conditions is that they have to be or had to have been jailed or hospitalized more than once within the prior 3 years. Now, the law also allows family members, police officers, or mental health professionals to petition the court to request that a mentally ill person be mandated to get treatment. So, the obvious question here is, who decides, right? Who decides who's going to get treatment? Well, the law would appoint a three-person panel to decide each case. Included in this panel would be a forensic psychologist that would review the case to determine if this mandate is necessary. Now, there's another part of the law that health officials offer voluntary treatment first before being allowed to get a mandate if the panel deems necessary. Now, obviously, you can see why this bill would be a little bit controversial because it has the effect, or could have the effect, of taking away somebody's civil rights. And many patient advocacy groups are criticizing the bill on those grounds. Now, one of those critics is the executive director of the Mental Health Association of San Francisco, who has said that, quote, "There's no real doubt that this is a process that fosters stigma around mental illness." So I'm a little torn on this. On one hand, these people do need help, but won't get it themselves, will finally get it, and maybe get better and stay out of prison. On the other hand, there is the danger of this being abused. And of course, there's that issue with stigmatization of the mentally ill or of mental illness and the obvious problems with civil rights. Now, I want to go to my panel and get your thoughts on this law's proposal that's looking very, very likely to pass in San Francisco. Now, it has passed California in the state, but the counties are able to adopt it, and so far only one county has. So I want to get your guys' thoughts. Let's go with our civil liberties expert, Sean. Sean, what do you think about this whole thing?
I was like, is he really going to go to me as an expert? Turns out he did. I'm actually probably against this bill. It breaks one of my #1 rules about American politics, and that is naming a law after a victim, because usually when that happens, a whole bunch of stupid shit gets crammed into the law. Like, we all understand that certain mentally ill people need to undergo treatment, and sometimes their mental illness prevents them from being able to make that decision to go under treatment, but you can't take away due process and substitute it with a panel of 3 experts. Like, that's not the way it works. I'm totally against this, and the only bill that should be named after a person should be the Sean Fitzgerald No More Naming Bills After Victims Act.
I'm a little torn on this too, but I'm probably going to side with Sean on it as well. The idea of involuntary treatment at any point in time, even if it is helpful, and I mean, it is difficult because it does have to come to a panel for review, and I guess the challenge would be where's the line at? Where is the point where they can determine whether or not they are in their right minds to refuse or accept treatment? That, I think, is the big sticking point. As for the whole thing about it might further stigmatize mental illness, I don't see how that's even remotely possible to further stigmatize mental illness. Mental illness is already very heavily stigmatized, even if not overtly, at least subversively, to the point where you don't really want to see or approach mentally ill people that you don't really know or understand on any public transportation, or if they're homeless or anything, because you don't know them or how they'll react. So that is already there. I don't see how the forced treatment notion would make that worse. But that shouldn't be the sticking point out of this at all, because, like I said, I'm with Sean on this. The idea of forced treatment is, I think that's crossing a line.
Well, okay, so here's a question. What do you consider forced treatment?
That is a good question. If the person is deemed capable of making their own decisions and refusing or accepting treatment, as in if they're recognized legally as being able to do that, and they're still forced treatment, then that's crossing a line. The challenge is, where is that line? Where does that fall? And that you need, I'd assume, a lot of professional examiners to determine what their mental state is at and whether or not they can safely make that decision for themselves. But it's very tricky. It needs a lot. It needs to be. They need to tread this line very, very carefully. And I'm kind of with Sean. Bills that are named after people, I don't think they usually do tread carefully. So I think it's a little too reactionary. I don't think it's quite as well thought out as it should be.
Okay, so Sean, are you aware that actually that there is a version of this law in New York, Kendra's law, right? That was instituted back in 1999, and apparently, according to some of the statistics from Kendra's law, that's actually been a success in reducing hospitalizations, suicides, violence to self and others, arrests, and incarceration. And so where the line is that it's really for people who are very drastic cases. And another couple of important points to remember is that medication, like when it comes to medication is not forced. So I just want to let you guys know that like if you're forcing people to take medication like on the street or something like that, that's horrible. That's crosses the line, right? But so that's not in there, okay? And another thing to remember, another important point, is that it is cheaper to administer to get these people who have already been arrested and hospitalized due to their mental illness, right? Instead of sending them to prison, they could get treatment. So that's where I'm like, that's where I agree with this. So, and there's a lot of support for this law and for laws like these from relatives of people with severe mental illness, so that they can actually get them the help they need. So, there's those points to consider. Jordan, let's have you weigh in, and then we'll go to Becca.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to do that thing I do where I disagree with everybody. Jeff, you and I are on the same side, I think, but I do want to take issue with what you said about like bringing cost into this. Whenever it comes to civil rights, I don't think cost should be part of that conversation. Like civil rights have to trump cost. Now, I get in this particular instance, maybe that line's a little grayer because we're either throwing them in jail or forcing them to get treatment. So either way, they're in a bad situation. So then it's like, okay, well, so of the two bad situations, maybe then you can factor cost. I don't know. Certainly it's better than throwing them in jail. But then I want to take issue with like a lot of what Sean said, and not just because Sean said it, because a lot of it was just bad. But the whole idea, like he said, like, oh, 3 people determining your fate is not due process. That's not what this law is. Like that panel or whatever is a part of the process in this whole thing. Sean just kind of like almost death paneled the conversation there. But these people, they have to have a history. Like I mean, I'm sorry if I'm repeating you here, Jeff. I know you read this, but they have to have had run-ins with the law. There has to have been behavior that caused harm to others or to themselves. And I'm a little bit shaky on the harm to yourself. I know it's a complicated thing because they are mentally ill, and we do have to sometimes protect people from themselves. I get that, but the harm to others thing, we've at least got to be in agreement there. Like, that's a problem. That's a public health issue. And so, I mean, and then I want to close with, on this show, I mean, I haven't been on the show for a while, but even like whenever I was on the show in the past, we've done stories about how the police can't handle mentally ill people and the injustice that they face at the hands of police and get killed because we just basically made being mentally ill a crime. Like, to me, this is a step in the right direction as long as it's done right, as long as these people have due process and it's not abused and it doesn't just become the old institutional system again. But it's better than sending cops who see every problem as a nail and every gun as a hammer, to come handle mentally ill people. If we can get them help, then let's get them help, man.
Yeah, those are a lot of good points. All right, so Becca, let's go to you. Get your thoughts.
Okay. So some of the supporting material on this original story said, just sort of generically, that studies show that AOT, that's assisted outpatient treatment, drastically reduces, and it lists the whole rehospitalization, lengths of hospital stays, arrests, incarceration, suicide attempts, victimization, and violent behavior. So, being an academic, I went to hunt down the original study that said this. And found this review from the Canadian Journal of Psychiatry from Schwartz and Swanson. Data's a little old, it's from 2004. But it looks like where they're getting that study show is from the Duke Mental Health Study, which does indeed show a decrease in all of these. But Schwartz and Swanson argue that, in fact, what the data would show is that enhanced services, and I'm quoting from them now, enhanced services and not coercion per se are the appropriate system response. So, coming back to the original measure, if we want to address some of these civil rights issues, the argument seems to be that, in fact, it's the increased access to services generally, not that people are being forced to use them, that seem to be making the most difference. And so I wonder if there's a solution that lies more in, okay, these people are already in the system. When they come through that first time, make sure they're getting this increased access. Don't wait until someone brings up a new concern.
Look, I just want to throw in that, look, I'm in favor of people getting mental treatment, and I think that you go to judges. Like, I'm in favor of that 72-hour hold that most states have, that if you think it's an emergency situation, they'll wait you for 3 days, and then it has to go before a judge. It's just I'm a little uneasy because some of these people are in jail for sure, or going to go to jail for sure, but some of them are on the street with a history of mental illness, and you don't know if they're functioning or not. Like, I feel like laws that are named after people tend to have things in there that are passed that wouldn't normally be passed without that, it's named after a victim, don't vote against the victim. So I feel like it could turn out to, take away people's freedoms that don't really deserve it. And that's my concern about the bill.